a song for you to hear?
Sure.
Okay. My granddaughter lives in Davis. She, the one that's making the Vader.
We all have
making her own schmaltz to make the matzo ball.
Wow.
Anyway, she found this group from the 70s or 80s or something, of singers, and she thought that I would really like this song. And I'm wondering if you are familiar with it. It's Yiddish. If you can understand it. Let's see, what is it? It's on.
Did it come in an email?
Oh, okay. Yes.
You're welcome.
Hello.
We see you yesterday just after I finished my walk. You were up a little bit later.
Yes.
It's a cold morning.
Yeah.
There you go.
Hey,
You weren't looking.
Never to be found again.
This simple 30-second method reverses memory loss for good. It's so easy.
Oh, keep that up.
An award-winning scientist from some
I don't
university
remember.
in Japan has just made a terrifying.
It's a lullaby.
I've never heard it before. Yeah. But it's pretty.
Yeah, everybody does.
Yeah.
It's the least expensive thing that you can buy.
I thought I'd like that.
The best money.
Very nice. I understand. I mean, it says mein Kinder, so sleep, my child, and Lula Lula is one of the ways a sort of nonsense, just low. Yeah, right, exactly.
Okay, that's, she asked me about that.
Yeah, just very pretty.
And they have albums and I can't remember why she.
Of course, if they don't, they're idiots. The only rule is you don't eat it, so you're not to put it in your body in any other way.
Yeah, no, but lovely. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, very pretty.
I thought that she would accept it, and so they went to the cow's milk, but it's absolutely okay according to ultra-Orthodox Jewish.
Just wondering.
Yeah.
so surprised that there was no guard outside.
Saturday morning there was a.
No, there is. So wonderful to be out. I'm sorry. I mean, but there is. Yeah.
I mean, to get all my stuff.
Right, and he would say there isn't any room here. You have to go upstairs or downstairs.
Maybe there is one. But I'm surprised with everything going on across the street.
Oh, yeah.
Probably looking at the clothes.
Right.
That's what it is. It's all the vintage parts are. Yeah, because
this chair.
there's so much going on. I'm just really surprised.
Here too, we had a full parking lot.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, we got a million. Not one, not two, not three. No, that's how you do it. If you said one, then that's how you. The norm is not one, not two, not three for everybody, because you don't want to count people. So you say not one, not two. And then when you say 4 or 5, then.
Why don't you want to count?
It's considered a superstition in Judaism. So
Talk to her maybe a week and a half ago.
lots of superstition in Judaism.
Make me a
It's like a side religion in Judaism. Hi, Phyllis.
I know one. I know two.
All right, let me, Shabbat Shalom.
I don't think anybody does any of it. We have someplace with
Okay.
Are you going on a cruise? Oh, good.
We didn't from Warsaw to Prague. We did Warsaw, Budapest, land, and then over to
They try to make sure that's going to last longer.
Would you like to say? 2.5. You want a Julia or Prague?
No, how about
No, I know. Well, and in Prague, there are square kind of where the synagogues are, right all in that area. Wow.
Oh, did you say Brooks? Yeah, it's because the bottom.
we give the case on Thursday, and yesterday was a court holiday, and so I'll go down and claim on Monday.
So I take 4.
All right, we're going to begin. So if you have not yet put on your talit, please rise and we'll say the bracha together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu v'yitateh b'tzitzit. And you may then be seated as we begin our service on page 14. Yisrael Hashamayim, Yisrael Hashamayim, Yisrael Hashamayim, Yitagel haaretz, Yeram hayam, Yeram hayam, Yeram hayam, oh, Yeram hayam, Yeram hayam, Yeram hayam, Oshia and Amecha, Baret and Amecha, Ure, 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 Venase Ma'olam, Oshia and Amecha, Baret and Amecha, Ure, 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 Venase Ma'olam. Shir Yom HaShabbat, Shir Yom HaShabbat, Shir Yom HaShabbat, Shir Yom HaShabbat, Mizmor Shir, Shir Yom HaShabbat, Mizmor Shir, Shir Yom HaShabbat. Katamar Yifrach, Yifrach, Tzadik, Katamar Yifrach, Tzadik, Katamar Yifrach, Yifrach, Tzadik, Katamar Yifrach, Yeres Baladon Yisken, 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 Yeres Baladon.
Push the button about
Yeah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. God Shama, say hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. La 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 la. La 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 la. Please be seated. ואהבת את אדוני בכל נפשך ובכל מאודך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך ושיננתם לבניך בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשבתך ובלומך ובשרתם להיות עמדך והיו לטוטפות לעיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the children of Israel and bid them to make tzitzit in the corners of their garments throughout their generations, putting upon the tzitzit on each corner of red and blue. When you look upon the tzitzit, you will be reminded of all the commandments of the Lord and obey them. You will not be led astray by the inclination of your heart or by the attraction of your eyes. Thus will you be reminded to fulfill all my commandments and be consecrated to your God. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord and your God." Azod, azod, shivachu ahuvim, shivachu ahuvim. Romemo, veromemo, 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 Venatenu, venatenu yedidim, venatenu, venatenu yedidim. Zmirot, shirot, v'tishbachot, v'erachot, v'hodaot, lemelech el chai v'kayam, Ram v'nisa, gadol v'nora, mashpil geim, u'magbiah shefalim, motzi asirim, ufodei anavim, v'yozedalim. V'yoneliam, v'yeshavam elah. Tehilo le'el Elyon Baruch Mevorach Moshe u'bnei Yisrael l'chanu shira v'simcha rabba v'yamru chulam mi chamocha v'elim Adonai mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh nora tehilot oseh Shira chadasha shivachu ulim l'shimcha tzvar hayam yachad kulam hadulim lichu v'yamaru So let's share some thankfulness today. At this moment, we're going to first celebrate birthdays. So the following are celebrating birthdays in the month of April. Sylvie Hockmeyer, Joan Easley, Lee Dollins, Carol Altschiller, Jerry Zatz, Pat Michelson, Ed Orens, Marcy Spetner, and Ellie Zatz. Anybody else whose names I've forgotten? Well, Mo, happy birthday. And we are celebrating a birthday in the month of April. So let's wish them all a happy birthday. Yom Holedet Sameach, Yom Holedet Sameach, Yom Holedet Sameach, Yom Holedet Sameach. Happy birthday. Kiddush is in your honor today. And you have to take home any chametz that is left. So let us open it up to whatever you feel you would like to share with us. That is good something going on in your life. You're grateful for it. This whole building is grateful. They're not going to see teenagers for 2 weeks. Yes.
It's April.
Yeah, really.
March was not a great month.
Not a good month.
For
No.
really, I mean, it was good for a lot of people. It just wasn't the best month we'd had in a while.
Yeah.
A lot going on. So April's It's April, we're happy.
Okay, be thankful it's April. Thank you, Kayla. Except for April 15th, not so.
No, it's
But it
October
can
15th.
change,
now.
right?
Yes.
Oh, it's moved. Okay. Yes, Ray.
Well, our son is gonna come in for Pesach from Texas.
Oh,
We haven't
nice.
seen Hetty for a while, so
Nice.
we'll have the family there for Pesach.
Nice.
It's adorable.
This time we get almost all the family that's here in California together.
Oh. Is he going to do the money starter?
The younger brother will.
Okay, good. Who else would like to share what you're thankful for? Yeah.
Well, I'm thankful every day, thankful for everything that, after you leave and you hear your sermon, it takes sometimes, to seep in a lot of things. So all through the day, I'm always thinking of things like, that you say to us. So
That's good. That explains no applause at the end of my sermon.
we always want to applaud, but you're taught not in temple. But, I'm happy again that Sybil Alavai is doing better, and that I got to spend last weekend with her, and that Passover's coming up. I said before we were going to Israel. We're not going to Israel because of all the mishigas that was going on, but not that we're not going to just postpone, but we're going to go onto a lovely trip to Prague and Budapest and Vienna and Amsterdam, and get to visit a lot of old Judaica, memories and see things. And I haven't been to Prague in 54 years. So from the time when I was young and hitchhiking and in Europe, as we all did with a backpack and stuff like that. So I'm happy because I'm wanting Bruce to see the world like I did. So I'm happy for that, and I'm happy for all good things for all of us in Fraser.
Thank you, Davida. Safe journey. Who else would like to share what you were thankful for?
Ray,
Ray Wazana, go ahead.
unmute.
Okay. Hi, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom. Armand and I had the best intentions of coming today, but I'm kind of still on back east time. I just got back a few days ago. I had the chance to visit Renee and Don, and they send their love. And it was so beautiful back there, even with the rain. I left with the rain here, got there with the rain. But it was wonderful to see them. And I forgot how the East Coast can be also. So happy
you,
to
Ray.
be back.
Good to have you back. Great. Thank you. How about that snowpack? Speaking of the rain, right? Even more expected. Wow. Who else would like to share what you were thankful for? Stan, please share.
Oh, Phyllis is waving her hand.
Oh, Phyllis, go ahead.
I'm thankful for this congregation and for the opportunity to be part of it online, since I wasn't able to be there today. And I really appreciate that.
Good. Thank you, Phyllis. And here's your husband.
Hey.
Speak into the camera. Well, as we've said, today is April. To be more correct, April 1st, April Fools. Well, how did that, pardon me, how did that ever get started? Anybody have any of their own ideas? Well, people have been pulling jokes and pranks on April Fool's Day for generations. The origins of the day are unclear, but some think it started in Roman times with the festival of Hilaria, which celebrated the onset of spring with costumes and games. Even though Hilaria was generally celebrated March 25th, in time the date April 1st emerged as a day of fun and making fools of others. But some historians speculate that April Fool's Day goes back to 1582, when France switched from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. The Julian calendar actually started in the spring, as then the Hebrew calendar still does, as far as their own calendar without the year counting, and the Hindu calendar starts that way too. But the Council of Trent in 1563 adopted the Julian calendar and adopted the Gregorian calendar. anyways. So some people, though, didn't get the message. And so the people that didn't get it, they're kind of making fools of them and saying, well, it's April Fool's now, you've actually missed the whole season. So people who were slow to get the news, failed to recognize the start of the new year, had moved to January 1st and continued to celebrate during the last week of March through April. And they were the butt of the jokes, they were the April Fools. But for Jews, April 1st has been marked by some deadly, non-funny events. Some of the greatest threats to Jewish communities have come on April 1st. Some moments of triumph also. In 1882, April 1st marked the start of a vicious blood libel in Hungary that convulsed the entire country and had ramifications beyond Hungary. After a young woman was found murdered in the town of a Hungarian town of Isar on April 1st, townspeople pointed the figure of local Jews, and there was a equivalent of a pogrom. During a high-profile trial, riots broke out in some Hungarian regions. When the Jews were eventually acquitted, the anti-Jewish riots spread. April 1st was also a date of another sensational blood libel in Bohemia in 1899. After a local Christian girl was murdered, authorities arrested a Jew named Leopold Hisler. He was later acquitted, but there was also pogroms. During the trial, anti-Jewish pogroms broke out across Bohemia and Moravia, including Prague. So, and April 1st, 1933, the newly installed Nazi government in Germany issued its first boycott against Jewish businesses and Jewish professionals. Yellow and black Jewish stars were painted on doors and windows of Jewish offices, businesses, and homes across Germany. Signs warning, "Don't buy from Jews," and "Jews are our misfortune," were posted throughout the country. Throughout the 30s and through World War II, April 1st seemed to be a particularly cruel time for Europe's Jews. And I won't go through all the other ones, but on April 1st was also the date of some of the A2 Jews. On April 1st, 1940, Shanghai agreed to accept some Jewish refugees. 14,000 European Jews eventually found safe haven there during the war. After the war, April 1st, 1947, saw the first ships enter the port of Eilat. The first Jewish immigrants to the nation state Israel passed through its straits. While the history of April has often been tragic for Jews, April 1st has a distinctively bright moment. On April 1st, 1925 was the date of Hebrew University first opened on Mount Scopus in Jerusalem, 7 years after the first building were created in the midst of World War I. And Hebrew Book Day was launched in Tel Aviv on April 1st, 1926. So, of course, we just have to take in perspective and realize that the calendar is a blessing, both the secular calendar, the way that we observe our life in the United States, and the Hebrew calendar, which is used almost exclusively in Israel, and certainly that we use it for not only religious purposes, but secular as well. So looking ahead as far as Israel is concerned, many people want to keep up with what's going down there, and they read in the regular newspapers and all. I just want to recommend 4 Israeli online newspapers that you can get online every day. Jerusalem Post, that's the one I use primarily, but not exclusively. Haaretz, Times of Israel, and Israel Today. All 4 of those are Israeli newspapers that are published online in English, and get the news there. And for those who haven't heard before, I'll be going to Israel, being there the first week in May, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. Yesher Koach. And let us all now continue with the silent devotion, the Amidah. We're at the bottom of page 18. Please rise. Sur Yisrael, Kuma v'Yezrat Yisrael, U'v'nei Inu Beha, Yehuda Yisrael. Go Aleinu Adonai Tzvaot Shemo. Kedosh Yisrael. Baruch Atah Adonai.
God Israel.
Be quiet. Shalom, Tova, Uvracha, Ge'ela, Chesed, Chesed Aleinu V'Yakol, Aleinu V'Yakol, Yisrael, Sin Shalom, Tova, Uvracha, Ge'ela, Chesed V'Rachamim, Sin Shalom, Tova, Uvracha, Ge'ela, Chesed V'Rachamim, Aleinu V'Yakol, Yisrael, Aleinu V'Yakol, Yisrael, Amecha, Sin Shalom, Tova, Uvracha, Ge'ela, Chesed Shalom, 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 Nimrom, Aseh, Shalom, Aleinu, Aseh, Shalom, 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 Nimrom, Aseh, Shalom, Aleinu, Please be seated. Rabbi Tkashmi Rabba, Yomari Brachi Tevi, Machmach Tevi Chayich, or Mechon, Bachai,
I got it.
Yehesh
Good service.
Mevorach, Leolam, Leom, Meomaya, Yitbarach, Yitbarach, Vishtapach, Yitpar, Vitamamida, Savit Hadar, Vilavas, Medicudisha, Kopachata, Shirata, Tushpachata, Nechmata, Damiram, Diomavi, Meru, Tesla, Donovan, Honda, Israel, Kadama, Avon, Vishmai, Meru, Amen. Yeshlam Rabba Mitchamai, Vachim, Aleyu, Va'akol, Yisrael, Meru, Amen. Ose Shalom, Bimromav, Hu Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu, Va'akol, Yisrael, Meru, Amen. We've come to the Torah service. Let's give out some honors. Who would like the honor of carrying the Torah through the congregation? Lonnie, I think we're going to call on your help. Thank you. Okay. Who would like the honor of Hagbah? Mo. And who would like the Galila honor, wrapping the Torah? Davida, good. And we continue our service on page 19. Ein kamocha ba'Elohim Adonai, Ein kema'asecha, Malchut kol olamim, U'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimloch li'olam va'ed, Adonai oz li'amo yiteh, Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom. Amen. Tivnei Yerushalayim, Tivnei Yerushalayim. Ki lecha lecha melech haolam v'yisa Adon Olam. Vayehi b'Zoharon vayomer Moshe Kuma Adonai v'yavusu oivecha v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha ki Mitzyon teisei Torah ki Mitzyon teisei Torah u'devar Adonai Yerushalayim Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Ve'amo Yisrael Kedushato Ve'yan Arachis Ve'lishmei Kadisha Kadisha Yakira Ana Amartu Shmechon Ve'yan Arachis Ve'yan Arachis Ve'lishmei Kadisha Kadisha Yakira Ana Amartu Shmechon Yehera Vakadama T'tiktamli Yoraita V'tashli V'shtamim V'libi V'libanecholama Yisrael V'tamu L'chaim V'lishlomo Amen.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Adonai iti, Ularoma Shemo Yachdo.
Lecha Adonai Hagidova V'Hagivura V'Hatiferet V'Hanesach V'Hahod Ki kol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz Ki kol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz Lecha Adonai V'Hagidva Zion takes a Torah. Zion takes a Torah. Zion, Zion, Zion takes a Torah. Zion takes a Torah. Zion takes a Torah. Zion, The Torah portion of this Shabbat is Tzav, and we'll all have an opportunity to have our communal aliyah. And everybody please point right here and kiss. Baruch hu Adonai Habarach, Baruch Adonai Habarach Le'olam Va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'na'atamanu et Torato, Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, צב את אהרון ואת בניו לאמור, זאת תורת העולה היא העולה. מוקדה על המזבח כל הלילה עד הבוקר, ואש המזבח תוקד בו, ולבש הכהן מדובד ומכנסי בד, ילבש על בשרו, והרים את הדשן אשר תאכל האש את העולה על המזבח, ושמו אצל המזבח.
Again. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Yeshkoach. And you may be seated. This is Shabbat Hagadol. Shabbat Hagadol is always the Shabbat right before Pesach, and one of the reasons it's called Shabbat Hagadol, the great or the long Shabbat, is because being right before Pesach, sometimes people would pepper the rabbi with a lot of questions dealing with the intricacies of the holiday, and so giving a lot of answers. It elongates the service, elongates the date, and so it's known as Shabbat Hagadol, the long Shabbat. So we're going to have an opportunity, and given our tradition, to allow you to ask some questions that you would have about the Passover season. But first, I would like to share a few thoughts with you. We, of course, use the Seder plate in order to display some of the items that we're going to be using. In the history of our tradition shows that there are items that we all are very familiar with. We point out some of them, and we eat some of them, and we discuss some of them. And so what's interesting is that the Jewish community over the centuries has also felt very free to add items to the Seder plate. So we're going to talk a little bit this morning about the items that have been added over, especially the last century. But before we do that, let's kind of have a really quick review of the items that are historically on the Seder plate. Because some of them you may think you know what they represent, but you will be surprised as to what they really do represent. But I think we all know that the shank bone represents the Paschal, the Passover offering that was in fact offered right before Passover, and it was given to the Israelites, and each Jew would go and find a hibachi somewhere in Jerusalem where they would set up a barbecue and they would roast it, and then they would eat as much as they could during the course of the evening. So that was the Passover sacrifice, which we represent now with the bone. Now, the egg is interesting, that hard-boiled egg that sometimes looks a little funny because it's marred on the outside, depending upon how you browned it. And the question is, what does it represent? Anybody here know what the egg represents?
Renewal.
Renewal, circle of life.
The Trinity.
All right, these are later additions to what the egg represents, but that's not the origin of the egg. The origin of the egg is the Chagiga offering. That was the offering that was also eaten not only at Pesach, but the other major holidays as well. And it's interesting that at the same time that the Israelites were getting the lamb sacrifice, they were also offering this festival sacrifice. And according to the Talmud, they had to eat that first. Because the Talmud says that when you eat the lamb sacrifice, you already have to have a little bit of food in your stomach. It's described in the Talmud as you eat it al hasoveya, a little bit already full, because there's a difference in motivation between eating something because you're starving and eating something to fulfill a mitzvah. So to do it for the right reasons, you have some food already in your stomach. Now, this additional holiday offering could have been any number of different animals, but sometimes it was also an egg. And so that hard-boiled egg actually represents the festival sacrifice. The maror we know is the bitter herb, which also can be romaine lettuce. And in fact, on the Seder plate, there are two places for maror and chazeret. So some Seder plates have 6 items on it, and that additional item is what's known as chazeret. And you know that we eat bitter herb twice. We eat it the first time when we dip in the charoset, but then we eat it a second time when we put it in the Hillel sandwich. And so the rabbis say that you can have 2 different kinds of maror. And so they actually have 2 different, they promote 2 different feelings of taste. The first one is when you have the maror, which is horseradish, which a lot of people use, and they temper it with charoset, which we'll talk about in a second. And so that is sharp and pungent. It brings sometimes tears. In fact, the rabbis say it's got to bring tears, or else you haven't fulfilled the requirement of eating the maror. And so it starts off as being very, very sharp and painful, and that sometimes is the way in which the hurt in life affects us. But then the romaine lettuce, which is also used, and sometimes it's easier to put that in the Hillel sandwich because it's a lettuce essentially, that the romaine lettuce is different because it tastes fine. Lots of salads are made with romaine lettuce, but the more you chew it, the more bitter it becomes in your mouth. Not that sharp pungency, but the bitterness, because that reminds us sometimes that pain lingers, and that sometimes it seems to be okay at the beginning, but then after a while, the pain really begins to set in. But that then is the maror. The charoset is interesting because we don't really talk too much about it. We just say that we dip the maror into the charoset, but it represents, as some of us, I think, have heard that from our earliest ages, that it represents the mortar that was part of the construction of slavery, which, by the way, the Jews didn't have absolutely nothing to do with constructing the pyramids. And what's interesting is that very often you will see, sometimes in Haggadahs, they will have a picture of the Jews creating pyramids. And the pyramids predated the Israelites, and so this one doesn't have a pyramid. Okay, but look at your Haggadahs and see whether there are pyramids there. So they built the cities of Pitom and Ramses. They built cities for the pharaoh, but not the pyramids. But the charoset is interesting because it represents something tragic, right? The building of that the slaves were creating, and yet it tastes so good. What is the lesson there? And I think maybe the lesson is, well, that's life. Life is a combination of the bitter and the sweet, the good and the bad, and we have to take them both in. And so when we look at some of our days, Kayla was talking about April, is a mix.
March was it?
Oh, March was a mixture of bitter and the sweet, and that's life as well. And sometimes we have to acknowledge that, and we have to take them both in, and maybe that's sometimes what the charoset reminds us of. Then you have the karpas, the parsley, or it could be any kind of vegetable, by the way. It doesn't have to be parsley. And it doesn't have to just be a little sprig of parsley. It could be a whole vegetable hors d'oeuvre. In fact, sometimes the 4 questions, especially when you have kids around the Seder, is when do we eat, when do we eat, when do we eat, when do we eat? And so sometimes, because we don't do a lot of eating the first hour of the Seder, and so if at the very beginning, when you have the vegetable hors d'oeuvre, it could be almost a salad. You could have jicama and celery and these kinds of things. So munch on those for a while, but that's what the karpas represents. And then you have the matzah, which is also essentially part of the plate. And the matzah, of course, represents the slavery of the Israelites and the fact that they had to leave in haste. So these are the items that we have in the Seder plate. What are the items that over the years have been added? Well, I think you're all familiar with the orange. Probably don't realize that the orange has nothing to do with feminism. It has nothing to do with that story that we've heard about the rabbi who said that the Orthodox rabbi that the day a woman's going to be in the pulpit is the day that you find an orange on the Seder plate. That's all made up. It really had to do with the LGBTQ plus community. It was established by Susanna Heschel, and she said there's got to be something to show that this is what we are doing to a whole segment of the Jewish community. We're kind of like spitting them out like seeds when we disenfranchise them so terribly. Remember, this is back in the 50s. And so she said we should eat something and like that has seeds, like an orange, and then we spit them out in order to show that we're spitting out an important part of our Jewish community. So that's what the orange represents. And then maybe these are other items that people over the years have added to the Seder plate. There are olives, which represents the peace and hope for a peaceful resolution to ongoing conflicts in the world. Some people put mirrors on the Seder plate in order to show that it symbolizes the importance of reflection and self-examination during the Passover season. And in fact, that's really what we're supposed to be doing, remembering slavery, but not just the slavery of people who existed 4,000 years ago or 3,200 years ago when the Exodus actually took place, but slavery today. Not only slavery today that is going on throughout the world and even in our own backyard here in America, sex slaves and child labor and things like that, but also we're enslaved. If slavery is shackling us to temptations and desires and habits that keep us from doing what we feel we should be doing, we're supposed to do some self-reflection and to try to eradicate those. Some people put a pineapple on the Seder plate, and it's a sign of hospitality and the welcoming of guests into our home. Fair trade chocolate is kind of recent. Some families have included this to raise awareness of issues related to labor exploitation and social justice. In Israel, I've just heard this week that some people are saying maybe we have to have other items on the Seder plate, such as many scales of justice, in order to represent justice and the balance of power, of powers. Others have maybe a little copy of Israel's Declaration of Independence in order to show the connection between the values of the Haggadah and the Declaration as we appreciate and we understand them. So these are some of the items that you may want to think about adding to your Seder plate, or anything that your family feels important that you would want to add, maybe talk a little bit about. By the way, speaking of Israel and speaking about Passover, the Israel Knesset, under the influence of the ultra-Orthodox, something that we're going to see more and more of, just passed a law this last week that chametz is not allowed to be brought into hospitals. Now that has really serious ramifications, and the ramifications are there are lots of people who aren't Jewish who end up at Hadassah Hospital or other hospitals in Israel, and sometimes you have Muslims who are going to be celebrating, observing Ramadan. If you have the night crew, if you're part of the night crew and you're allowed to eat, now you suddenly can't bring in some of the foods that are a staple of your diet. That doesn't seem fair. There are people who may not keep the kashrut at the level that other people might keep kashrut for Passover, and we're saying that they can't bring in even non-kosher food, let alone chametz food. And who's going to police this? Who's going to stand at the entrance of and check people's items to make sure that they're not bringing in a sandwich? And so Shas, which actually was the party that brought this to the Knesset, the overwhelming vehemence against this law, which just seemed wrong. And by the way, if you're asking, well, what does Jewish law say about like somebody who's not Jewish coming into your kosher for Passover home with a sandwich because they are going to be doing some work for you there? There's absolutely no law that says that people who are, especially people who aren't Jewish, who are not bound by the laws of Passover, that they can't bring in chametz as long as it's their own personal item, and you be careful about where you're putting it and what you're doing with the rest of the house. It's very, very clear that non-Jews can bring in chametz if it's their own personal item into another place where Passover is observed. So when the vehement protests by the Israelis came to the Knesset, Shas backtracked a little bit, and they said, all right, look, we're going to keep the law, which some people said is an attempt to try to force non-observant Jews to keep Passover. So the law says we still can't bring chametz into hospitals, but nobody's going to check. Wink, wink. So that seems to be the new law in Israel, and you can check that out online to see what the effect is going to be this coming Passover. So I want to share with you one final thought, and then we're going to open it up to any questions, including those of you online, that you would like to ask. And it's a quick Dayenu thought, which I think maybe if you would like to add this in your own Seder, or think about it during your Seder. Because the Dayenu, you're all familiar with this, it would have been enough, had God done this but not this, it would have been enough. But it actually, a lot of the stanzas just don't make a lot of sense. We kind of referred to this a few weeks ago when we talked about some of them. Like, had God brought us to Mount Sinai and not given us the Shabbat, doesn't always seem to make sense, because where did the laws of Shabbat come from? But we learned that actually they were observing a little bit of Shabbat before they even got to Mount Sinai. But how about this? Had God taken us out of Egypt, but not made judgments on them, it would have been enough. Which doesn't make sense, because the judgments, the plagues, there wouldn't have been an Exodus without the plagues. Or how about this? If God had split the sea for us and not taken us through on dry land, it would have been enough. Yeah, you're going to be butchered by the Egyptians who are coming after you on one side rather than the other side. So what do you mean it would have been enough? So I think that there's a lesson here, and I think the lesson is that sometimes we look at events and we see them in a continuum, which means that we look back and we see, well, what was happening that in the long run to everything that was going on. So if you look at somebody who survived the Holocaust, so here they lived through the trauma of the Holocaust, and they survived when so many didn't. And what happens to them? A lot of them end up in the camp in Cyprus. At one point, there were 50,000 Holocaust survivors who were forced to live on Cyprus in these deplorable conditions in these camps, because the British were not allowing them into Israel. And then when they got into Israel, when they finally left the camps, which sometimes took years, and they get into Israel, what are they facing now? A war. And life was going to be terrible. And so you could say, yeah, had we survived the Holocaust and all these terrible things happened, what do you mean it would have been enough? Well, yeah, it would have been enough. The people who survived the Holocaust at the end of the period of the Holocaust look back and they said, yeah, that would have been enough. Yeah, who cares what's going to happen? I want to be happy right now because I survived something terrible. And so for each moment that we have, we can look back and we can say that was wondrous. And I want to be appreciative of that, regardless of what the future is going to hold. And so, yeah, the Israelites, after each of those events, the plagues, the splitting of the Red Sea, and the bringing of the manna, and the getting of the commandments, and all of that, yeah, maybe in the long run, things didn't always end up so great for the Israelites or for the Jews. But to be appreciative of each moment of those sometimes is a requirement that we have in our own lives. To be thankful for the partial, to be thankful for the moment, and not say, yeah, but in the long run, where is this going to go? So each moment is precious, each wondrous act is precious, and let's appreciate it. So now let's open it up to any questions that you might have. Lonnie.
What's the second Pesach?
So Pesach Sheni. Phyllis, did you want to ask about Pesach Sheni too? Is Phyllis still there? So Pesach Sheni is in the Torah, it says that God institutes Passover, and you offer Passover sacrifices. But then there were some Israelites that went to Moses and said, you know, when you observed Passover, unfortunately, I had come in contact with the dead and I was ineligible because you're impure. Or I was out of town and I couldn't get there in time to be able to observe the Passover sacrifice, but I still want to feel a part of it. What can I do? So Moses said, well, let me check with God. And he says to God, people who missed it, they want to know what they can do. And God says, okay, exactly 1 month after the first Passover, there's going to be a second Passover, a Pesach Sheni. And they can eat matzah and bitter herb, and they can observe the sacrifice, and they can celebrate Pesach even late when they are in a proper position to be able to do so. And we learn from that sometimes we get a second chance, and we have a chance to do it again. Judy.
So I have a follow-on for that. Do people really do that?
I have not heard of people who can do it, especially because we don't offer sacrifices anymore. So the idea that you were unclean or you were out of town, you can do this today at the right time and not have to delay. But those who take Passover seriously, they do have this out. They actually, if they were in the hospital and they were going through surgery or something else was going on, they could post. They could actually do a Pesach Sheni. Fine.
Do they have to kosher their house?
So apparently, for that one day, go through the whole rigmarole.
Well, then I vote for Shani if we don't have to kosher the house. And it's only one day, right? Not 8 days.
It's one day. Yeah.
Let's go with that.
Yeah, and apparently it's just one day. You don't have to do the whole 7 days or 8 days. So, yes, good question. I don't think they had a kosher. Any other questions? I want to make sure that the people online. Phyllis.
How about, would you talk a little bit about dairy products that we can buy?
Yeah, that's very interesting about dairy products. Why is it? You know, if you buy your dairy products before Passover, it doesn't have to say kosher for Passover. If you buy them during Passover, it does have to say kosher for Passover. So make sure you do all of your dairy purchases before Passover. But the question is, why is it okay if you buy it before and not during? It has to do with a law that's known as Batel B'Shishim, which means the annulment by a 60th. What that means is, before Passover, when you buy milk that especially is enriched with vitamins, sometimes the vitamins have a little bit of chametz that may be a part of it or attached to it in some way. But the annulment of the 60th means that if it's in there accidentally, it's annulled. It's like if you're making a stew, not during Passover, and you drop a little bit of milk in it by accident, and even if you mix it up, it doesn't invalidate the stew if the milk was less than 1/60th the contents of the stew. And so it's the same thing here. The idea about Batel B'Shishim, the annulment, only holds before Passover. It doesn't hold true during Passover. So that's why anything you buy before Passover, you have that out, but during Passover, you don't have it, and it doesn't, and you can't eat or drink it.
So it just has to be marked kosher, and as long as it's kosher.
It doesn't even have to be marked kosher. If it's dairy, if it's sour cream and butter, and all of that, it doesn't have to say kosher for Passover. Any other questions?
Is there a comment? On many of the Jewish holidays, we have to remember Zakor, but this is a unique holiday where it's not a matter of remembering; it's a matter of experiencing. That we have to be as if we were there, and that takes on all different kinds of meanings. And could be something that is more let's say individual as opposed to collective. And so that's one of the things that to me is unique about it, and especially at the Seder.
Thank you. Somebody once said Jews eat their history.
And that's where you start.
Right. Yeah. And that's true. You need to experience the slavery, if even a little bit, and that's why we end up eating the foods that we eat and doing some of the things that we do during the Seder in order to try to rekindle some of our memory so that we appreciate it even more. Good. Lonnie.
Is that, you said the dairy, the milk, does that apply to cheeses as well, all dairy products?
Yeah, although remember, cheeses, if you keep kosher, you would only buy kosher cheese because of the rennet and the way in which cheese is processed. But milk and other dairy products isn't processed quite the same with so many additives in the processing. Nancy.
I read an interesting article this week about Miriam's cup. That, first of all, I always thought you filled it with wine, but you actually filled it with water. And that the water represents the well of Miriam that kept the Israelites going. It miraculously kind of went along with them in the desert. And I found that fascinating. We will definitely be including that.
Yeah, it's interesting that the rabbis of late noticed that there is an absence of women in the Passover story. And so one of the ways they tried to resolve that was by creating a ritual of Miriam's cup. It seems that this well was only there, that accompanied the Israelites for 40 years, and it was only there through the merit of Miriam. And the Torah says it's because the day that she died, the well dried up. And so it had to be associated with Miriam. So have a separate cup with water, and remember a little bit of not only Miriam's dancing, but also her well. Other questions or thoughts?
You were talking about adding things to the Seder plate.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that as soon as we began doing maybe the walks to end genocide for Darfur, and we had included a fourth matzah in the 3 matzahs on the plate. because one was to represent modern slavery or Darfurians and what they were going through.
Yeah, it's another good example of things that have been added to the Seder. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Right.
One other question. What kind of calendar was there at the time of the Jews in Egypt or whatever? What calendar was used?
The calendar doesn't begin until the Exodus. And God says, I'm going to establish months. And that's the very first time that the Jews, who, when they were slaves, had no control over time. They couldn't celebrate Shabbat or holidays. And so the institution of the calendar, according to the Torah, is not until that moment. The calendar has changed, but the Jewish calendar is essentially a solar year and lunar months. But that's around when the historians, or at least the rabbis, say the Jewish calendar was instituted.
The reason I ask is that you go back to the time of Abraham or whatever, and they've lived so many years, whatever, and what were they using counting for time? I mean, somebody lived, 250 years or whatever, that seems a little impossible. What did they use? How did they tell time?
So first I'll tell you a pun, only because I get very few opportunities to do it. This whole idea about time was really going back to the time of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great apparently had discovered, as scientists discovered, a liquid that changed colors every so often, and said that this is amazing that we now can control how time passes. And he began to put these rags that were dipped in this liquid that changed colors every few hours, and had people tie it around their guards, tie it around their wrists, and it became known as Alexander's rag time day. We have to remember that in the Torah, that they probably counted days and months differently. So when it says that somebody lived 900 years, yeah, obviously they didn't live 900 years. It's not to be taken literally. It's to be taken as an exaggeration, that maybe this was somebody who just lived a long time, but that it probably did not coincide with lunar or solar years that we're familiar with. The second thing is that the rabbis of the Talmud actually divided the day into segments, like 6 segments, and then gave each of them a name. And so for the first segment, you could say the morning prayers. For the last segment, you could say the evening prayers. For the middle segment, you could say the afternoon prayers. And they had to divide up the day that way, which means that when the days were longer, when the days were shorter, those segments became shorter or longer as well. But you had to keep track of how the moon, how the sun rose and when it set, and then you divided that up into these segments, and that's the way in which they told time.
I'm just thinking, I can understand why there was no need for a calendar when we were slaves in Egypt, for one thing. Do I work today? Yes, of course you work today. You're a slave.
Exactly, right. They had no control over their schedule. They had no control over when Shabbat was. And even in the time of Esther, you remember that Esther becomes ensconced in the king's palace, and apparently she had no control over her week either, because she was isolated from any way in which the Jews were celebrating Shabbat, or the way how the days were moving along, and when the 7th day was. So what Esther did, according to the rabbis in the book of Esther, she made sure she only had 7 maids who waited upon her, and she gave each of them a name. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And that whenever Saturday came by, she celebrated Shabbat. Of course, that's fanciful, because the chances are that Esther never celebrated Shabbat or kept kosher. She was a secular Jew, as was Mordechai. There being no more questions, we're especially...
Wait,
Phyllis, yes, go ahead.
You'll indulge me. There was a comment about Miriam's well, and of course, the well dried up when she died, but there were other sources of water. There were these brackish ponds, and the water wasn't very good, but God, in God's wisdom, sent special fish to these ponds, and these special fish took water in through their mouth and expelled it through their gills. And in honor of that, and most Passover Seders today, we have gill filtered fish.
Very nice, Phyllis. Gill filtered fish. That is wonderful.
Waiting.
What is that? What is that song? The crane in Spain stays mainly on the plain. The crane
on the table makes a stain.
So let's do a Misha Bear. Yeah, Claire.
I can't. This is with all the Jews, the Jews had to deal with. Thank goodness they didn't have to deal with daylight savings time.
Yeah, and it's becoming a problem for Jews today between the standard and the daylight savings time. I think we've got a chance to look at how difficult it might be. Yes. So let us do a Misha Be'erach for those who are not well. I'll begin it. Misha Be'erach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak V'Yaakov Yimotenu Saraf Garachel V'Leah Hu Yivarech V'Rapeh Et HaCholim. Make God keep and sustain these who are sick. So let's go through the
Nancy Satin, Walter Penny, Jimmy Green, Rob Bento, Noah Bento.
Thank you.
Nadav Saladin, absent Linda Sharf, Bob Sharf, Bonnie Ritter, Fran Winters, Rebecca Farber, Linda Rohrman, Nancy Arkin, Mina Hersher, and Barbara Garaboff.
Thank you.
Phyllis and Frank Bowl.
Yes.
Bernie Halpern, Neil Epstein, Murray Hyman, Sandy Hyman, Adele Harris, Stephanie Lazarovitz, and Robert Rich.
Thank you. Good.
Phyllis, Sheila, Lou, and Jessica.
Leah Baruch for Peshach.
Phyllis, Sheila Hart, and Barbara Grumman.
Thank you.
And Joe Golden and Roger Barker.
Mike Roach, Bruce Cabala, Angie Testa, Cindy Marks, Robert Fell.
Thank you. Any names would you like to?
Barbara Grubman, Sheila, Phyllis, Eileen Wasserman, Christine Cole, and Rachel.
Thank you. Other names that would you like to? Kodesh Baruch Hu Yishlach Lehem Bim.
Did you do the?
No, I'm sorry. Ray.
Phil Cooperman, Ray Mountner, Suzanne Matioy, Janetta Wazana, Fran Kabolnik, Barbara Grutman, Sheila Hart.
Thank you. Sam.
Mark Suckman and Fran.
Thank you. Other names? Raise your hand and I'll call on you. Any other names here? HaKodesh Baruch Hu Yishlach Lehem Bimheira Refuat HaNefesh Berufuat HaGuf B'tosh HaChleis Roven Omar Amen. May the merciful restore these people to full health and to full vigor, along with all others who are struggling with illness, and let us say Amen. Before we say the prayer for the state of Israel, this is prayer for the United States. May God bless the United States of America and protect her. And before we say our prayer for the state of Israel, Stan again provided us with this little tidbit about Israel. A 6,000-year-old copper fishing hook, possibly used for catching sharks or other large fish, has been discovered during an Israel Antiquities Authority excavation in Ashkelon. It was announced just this last Wednesday morning. The fishing hook, one of the oldest ones to ever be discovered, was uncovered prior to the construction of a new neighborhood in Ashkelon that dates back to 2018 and is now going to be exhibited this April at a archaeological congress in Israel. The hook measures 6.5 centimeters by 4 centimeters, and it is suitable for hunting sharks as long as 2 or 3 meters or large tuna. The director said more ancient fish hooks found previously were made of bone and were much smaller than this one. The use of copper began in the Chalcolithic period, and it is fascinating to discover that this technological innovation was applied in antiquity for the production of fish hooks for fishermen along the Mediterranean coast. The Schroeders volunteered for an archaeological excavation in Ashkelon for 5 weeks in the summer of 1987. Wow, that's cool. Let us.
They had centimeters back then.
Or centimeters, as the pregnant women were used to call it. We're now going to rise, and we'll have we have the Haggadah Galila. So if the Haggadah Galila could please come forward, and everybody please rise. But first, the prayer for Israel. Avinu Shabashamayim, Tor Yisrael v'Goalo, Marei Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Tzmiat Geulatenu. Zot HaTorah Asher Sham Moshe Lifnei Bnei Yisrael B'Yadai Yad Moshe Yisrael Ve'oraita Hanu Yisrael Ve'oraita Hanu Torah Hallelujah Torah Hallelujah Torah Hallelujah Torah Ashirenu Adonai Elecha Shula Kadesh 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 Remain standing for Aleinu, page 24. Aleinu l'shameach l'ador hakol, l'teikevim ha'leser breshit, shalom asanu k'noyeh ha'basar, v'lo shamayim v'mishpachat ha'adama, shalom samchakenu kahem, v'gor aleinu v'olam olam, v'anachnu korim ומשתחווים ועומדים לפניכם המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שהוא נותן שמיים ויסר הארץ ומשה יקרוב בשמיים ממעל ושכינת עוזו ושכינת סוסו וגם מרומים Elokenu, Emes Malkeinu, Efes Ulato, Takatu v'Torato, Yadata Hayom v'Hashevata, Elef Alecha, Ki Adonai Hu Elohim, Bashamayim Nima'al, V'Haaretz mitachat Eimod. V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol haaretz v'yom hahu v'yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Please be seated. However, let those who are in mourning or remain standing as we observe these yahrzeit for the coming 2 weeks. Kalman Goldberg, John Miles, Harvey Silk, Esther Perez, Elsie Isikowitz, David Haas, Mildred Shanin, Evelyn Sudak, and Sylvia Stone. Are there any names that I neglected? Moorish Kaddish is on page 25. Yitgadal v'yitzgadal shemei rabba v'yalma di'ra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayedecho beit Yisrael v'agalav v'zman kari v'yimru Yehei shmei rabba v'barach le'olam Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromon v'yitnaseh Yishadar v'yishaleh v'yitalol shemei v'kudusha b'richu Le'elam mikol v'chata v'shirata V'chata v'nechemata Da'miran v'alma v'yimeru Amen Yehei shalom v'yitzaleh V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru Amen Oseh shalom b'ramav Hu yaseh shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru Amen. Please be seated. So we chant our concluding prayer of the Olam. Jordan will share some announcements.
Well, we can make this a real Shabbat Gadol, or no. Shabbat Shalom. No Tish this Thursday or next Thursday. Next Shabbat service, April 15th at 10:30 a.m. That's it. No, if you haven't signed up to be a virtual or real walker for the Walk-In Genocide on April 30th, sign up. I have. And in preparation for Mother's Day, we're collecting $10 Target gift cards. Anybody have anything else to add?
Yes.
Yes.
I wanted to mention that I have the Shir notes and the flyers from the Shir notes, which includes the letter to sell your homeless, which is coming up the last day. And I mentioned in the Shir notes, in the Jewish Journal, they have a page that says about a local rabbi. They've done this for some time now. This week, the rabbi is very local. It's Rabbi Stuart Vogel from Temple Aliyah. So I have some Jewish journals there, and I have some Shir notes. Thank you.
All right, notes and journals. Who could ask for anything more? Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. And if you haven't sold your hummus yet, yes, Barbara.
I just wonder if anybody's aware of the little blue square.
Oh,
Yeah, I just saw that for the first time. There has been an ad. Who's been putting that out? ADL?
Well, the first time I saw it was The Voice. They did a whole thing about it. They showed the screen of the TV with the little blue square. Right. They talked about how it took up, I think it was 2.4% of your screen, which is how many Jews there are. But yet we are more than 50% of all the issues that go on. And so this little blue square, you're supposed to be putting it all over your social media. I don't do a lot of social media. You're supposed to be putting it all over there to show support.
That should go in the Seder plate.
Yeah, the blue square. Yeah. So this blue square is being sponsored by some Jewish organization. I just saw it. We just saw that for the first time, and apparently it's because of the rampant anti-Semitism that seems to be occurring in some communities. This was in order to have people who aren't Jewish show support for the Jewish community, and I guess for Jews to show support for others within the Jewish community who might be subjected to levels of anti-Semitism. So so look for those ads.
It's very important to put on your social media pages because I guess that's where it really gets out to everybody.
It's on TV all the time.
Yeah, it's been on TV several times.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's nice.
Remember that I'm not going to see you again until after Pesach, so I want to remind you, if you still have questions that you would like to ask, to feel free to communicate with me. If you haven't sent in your form for Chavetz, either use the one that Stan is providing or download it yourself from the email that Stan sends out with the Shir notes, and make sure you do it before Tuesday morning because we're going to complete the sale by then. We conclude our service with the singing of Adon Olam, page 26. Adon Olam, Asher Malach, B'terem Kol, Yitzir Nivra, Li'en Asah, B'chesokol, Azai Melech, Shimoni
We're on the third page of the.
Hi. I hope you could all hear okay.
Yes, we could. Rabbi, we wish you and Bonnie a very happy, healthy Passover and all your family. And
Thank you. And to all of you as well. Happy Pesach. Zisen Pesach.
we will see you soon.
Good, good. I look forward to it. Okay. Shabbat Shalom.